stress or anxiety just for a few moments. And as we have stilled the body, we now can quiet the mind. Just let any thoughts that come, let them drift and go by, and return to your breath. Return to the breath. Turn your awareness to your breath. And so as we play this music that's going to take us into the silence, I invite you to see this is a powerful piece of music, and just let it resonate with you. See if it does resonate with you. And see if you find and experience the awe and wonder of God. What we choose to call God is the dwelling of your being. And so just rest and listen to this music and let it take you straight into the silence, and just sit there and be and experience the awe and wonder of who you are. Remember to breathe. So now totally in your own time, just take another deep breath. And again, feel that peace that we get when we go within to this place and know that no matter what it is that's going on the outside, the chaos, the confusion, there's only peace when we go within. So now take a deep breath in, and as you do, and exhale, begin to move your body. You can wiggle your fingers and toes. Shrug your shoulders. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So I failed to mention to Bill that what I'm talking about today, what I'll be talking about actually is about a rock star. That wasn't included in Bill's intro. Sorry, Bill. And actually by that I mean a Unity rock star. For that's what Eric Butterworth is. If you've been around Unity any length of time, you've been there now, you're going to know Eric Butterworth is a rock star in the Unity movement. We can talk about Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore, co-founders of Unity. And we talk about them a lot, and yet Eric Butterworth is the single person that advanced the Unity teachings and movement even more so than the Fillmores did at the time that he came in. So, and I wanted to read this one quote for him, and he's got all kinds of quotes. That's the fun thing about reading. Melissa and I always thought he doesn't pull any punches. Melissa and I were talking about in this book, he pulls no punches. He'll tell you like it is. All of his books. He wrote 16 books, and this was the first one. And I ran across this one. I hadn't read this one again in a few years, and it's really a great book to have on your bookshelf. It's a great book that you can get a lot of it from truthunity.net. You can go there and get a lot of the teachings. You can hear some of his lectures. So I encourage you to do that. But the quote I wanted to share with you is, the one thing a fish can never find is water. And the one thing that man, or man and woman, can never find is God. Your fortune is not something to find, but to unfold. Where you are in consciousness has everything to do with what you see in your experience. We don't change what we are, we change what we think we are. We don't change what we are, we change what we think we are. There's a lot to think about that. That's very deep, very profound. So we don't find God because we are in God. We're made up, we live in God just like the fish live in the water. That's the metaphor there. So Eric Butterworth was ordained in 1948 at Unity Village. He served, he affectionately called Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore, he called Charles Papa Charlie, and Myrtle Fillmore was Mama Myrtle, and I think most of the people on the Unity Village campus at the time was doing that. But anyhow, he established 3 Unity churches after he was ordained in 1948. He first went to Pittsburgh and started the church there for a couple years, and then he went to Detroit and Detroit Temple and started a church there where he had over 2,000 people in weekly services. Then he went to New York, and he was there until he passed in 2003. And he spoke at several different venues in New York City, big venues. And he wound up at Avery Fisher Hall, which is a concert hall in New York, drawing 2,000 people, drawing over 1,000 people. It was reported, I've seen different reports of that he drew 5,000 people a week. Well, I think that was throughout his services throughout the week. because the auditorium in Avery Hall only seated about 2,700. So the report that he had 5,000 people was true, but it was throughout the week. He wrote 16 books, and again, this was his first one. Discover the Power Within You. If you want to know more about him, if you want to know more about yourself, read that book. The Discover the Power Within You is his most influential and biggest seller. Let's see, as of the mid 2000s, he'd sold over 150,000 copies of that book. Discover the Power Within You, and that's his message. Is that the message that Jesus came to teach us was that we are divine. We are divine. He came to talk about our divinity, not his. So that's a great way of looking at it. Oprah. He was the first unity minister on TV, and Oprah said it changed her understanding of life and religion by that book and talking to him. And again, his wife, this was his second wife, delivered the last sermon with him. He was so frail that nobody could understand him and hear him, and so she stayed there with him while he delivered his last sermon. It's interesting that the Avery Fisher Hall, the rent for that, the lease for that, was $3,700 a week. $3,700 a week, and like most churches and offering places, he didn't charge an attendant. He didn't charge a fee to get in. So he made money by selling tapes, cassette tapes, and doing other lectures and things like that. But I thought that was pretty amazing that he could draw that many people and still make it positive. It is said that he preached positive thinking. At least that's what the media throughout New York always said, that he was a positive thinker. And so he influenced Oprah and Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou called Eric Butterworth her pastor, her minister, Norman Vincent Peale, and many others. And it's interesting, while he amplified the unity message, and we'll get into that in just a minute, his, quote, denominational allegiance, if you will, was weak compared to his concentration on his ministry. While he was the clearest of these unity teachers, he said, I don't teach unity, I teach Eric Butterworth. And his teachings kind of fell in that. His critics say that during his 35-year career in New York, he promoted him on his own self instead of a durable institution to further the message. He was notorious for getting associate ministers, and the plan was, when he brought them in, to let them take over in 3 years. I think there was 4 or 5 that I can think of, and I know several of them that did that. They've told me stories about it. Then he never retired, so he stayed there until he passed. He made his transition. The book, and part of the neat thing about Eric Butterworth is you can refer, and Melissa and Bill I'm sure will do this too, you can refer to this book, and then you can always refer to 15 other books to get additional information about what he said and what his philosophy was. So it's a jumping off point as well. And one of the things that an author said, it serves as a warning for clergy and laity in any church, anything like this, to the dangers of framing a person around a teaching around a person rather than a sustaining faith, sustaining faith community. So he taught positive thinking. Fire and brimstone were decidedly not Butterworth style. He did not teach fire and brimstone, as you can imagine. He called sin, what we call sin in unity is generally missing the mark. That's an archery term. Sin is a translation the Old English translation of missing the mark. He called it self-inflicted nonsense. Self-inflicted nonsense. I like that. There was an article in Forbes that summarized his message thus. Here's what he says about us, each one of us. We alone have the power within us to solve our problems, relieve our anxieties and pain, heal our illness, improve our golf game, or get a promotion. So we alone have the ability to do that, which sometimes is what turns people off from unity or new thought, because it puts the response. We can't blame God now. We got to blame ourselves. Take responsibility. No blame, just take responsibility for our own truth. So what did Eric Butterworth, I was trying to think, what was he trying to convey in this book, at least the first chapter in this book? And I tried to stay with this. I could have jumped ahead and jumped to several other books and talk about his messages, but it's actually, and there's another book here that is really, really fun to read. It's his biography. So there are biographies on Charles and Myrtle, and there's a biography here on him, and you can imagine he had a rich life. There was divorce, and kids didn't like him, and died. And he was very egotistical at times. So it'd be easy to talk all day about that, but his message, it's a very common thing. You see it in a lot of leaders. They talk very good at what they do, and then their personal life has little bumps and roads, like most of us. So it's a really interesting journey that he did. So I wanted to stay with this book, or at least this first couple chapters, the introduction in this chapter. His theme in this was he wanted to answer the question, what is unity? What is unity? You can imagine that being his first book. He wanted to say, what is unity? That's kind of a deja vu moment for us, because we've asked that too, right? Then we said that when a few months ago we did How to Speak Unity. We said that. So why is Butterworth asking the question? We asked the same question. Well, and if you remember, on the Unity website, here's what they say unity is. Unity is a positive, practical, progressive approach to Christianity based on the teachings of Jesus and the power of prayer. Unity honors the universal truths in all religion and respect each individual's right to choose a spiritual path. So that's what if you will, that's the elevator speech from UWM, Unity Worldwide Ministries. And then Butterworth goes on to says, if we were a Christian sect, a sect from Christianity, with established creeds and traditional forms of worship, it would be a relatively simple matter to answer the question, what is unity? We're a sect from the Baptist or the Methodist, or we have a set of what we believe. Well, we know that's not the case. That's not where we came from. That's not where the Charles and Myrtle. That's not the origin of what unity is. So, if that was the case, it would be easier to answer the question, what is unity? He goes on to say, what is unity is up to you to answer, each one of us to answer by what it means to us. What it comes to us through these teachings. These teachings are very individualized. I mean, they're universal truths, and yet the way they manifest in our lives, it's very, very, very individual. And so, as I hesitate to tell you this, you might not really think this is possible in a unity movement, but there's disagreement about that. What is unity? There's disagreement, and sometimes pretty robust disagreement. So, I participate in a Unity Ministers Facebook discussion group and some other conferences, and there's no consensus on the question, and that's putting it mildly. But see, I think the debate is good. I've asked that question the years I've been in Unity, 35 years now almost, and so I've asked that question, and what I'm asking is, what is it to me? It doesn't matter what Unity Worldwide Ministry says it is, really. It's what is it to me? What is it to each of us? And especially in our spiritual community, what is it to us? So we'll hopefully come out with something clearer, a more clear understanding as a group, as a community, when we do these discussions. And disseminating, Butterworth was great at promoting these and disseminating these ideas. And again, he did it in a way that was clearly, he was focusing the teachings of Eric Butterworth, and which is the same. I mean, he taught the unity messages, but he had a focus on himself. And we see that in traditional churches. I mean, you see that in a lot of traditional churches where the leader of the church gets to the leader, and then that's what the church is that one person, and it kind of loses focus a little bit on the teachings. I don't think Butterworth did that personally. I think he stayed along with the teachings, because most of us know his teachings are very clear and concise. His key teachings are the divinity of man, again, of humankind, and the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven is at hand right now. We don't have to wait. We don't have to wait for a quote, some message to go to heaven or hell, if that's the case where you want to go. He says unity did not originate as an offshoot of a Christian sect. It was a banding, or a denomination. It was a banding together of students. As a matter of fact, when they started in 1889, after the publication of a magazine called Modern Thought, it was really a prayer support. It was prayer in Charles and Myrtle's home. I think the issue with that came in because you can imagine people, I call it throwing rocks at it, disagreeing with what they were trying to do, and these teachings that, we're divine and the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The traditional church lost that message. And so it was started in 1889, like I say, with the publication of Modern Thought, and it was originally called Christian Science Thought. But this caused many to think in unity and outside that it was related with Christian Science. Another New Thought, there's really, a handful of New Thought teachings, movements that happened about the same time that unity was being formed. And so founder Mary Baker Eddy filed a complaint against unity about that, and she won the exclusive right to the term Christian Science, so unity stopped using it. So the teachings are similar, definitely not exact, and there's lots of differences, and we're not going to go into the differences. We got enough to say about what we believe. So in the initial days of unity, there remained a quest for a new church to grasp this concept of the kingdom of heaven is at hand as both an inner and an outer thing, or how did we describe that, to be free itself from this path. But who would dare to claim to be the new church? Who would be the new church? Well, Butterworth says we're not a new church. Unity's not a new church and does not consider itself a church in the traditional sense. Again, this was in 1965 is when he wrote this. And Unity has, we even went through a period of that here. We changed our name to Unity Spiritual Center of Panama City because of the connotation of church. There's all these discussions that we're having. There's some move to back. If it looks like a church, if it walks like a church, it's probably a church. So there's some element. It's a both and. There's some elements of both. So there's some movement. Some churches in Unity are changing, going back and saying Unity. They're not using. Most of them so far are not plugging back in with the word Christ, but they are changing to church. But he says, what Butterworth says, and others say this too, that the reason unity came along, there's a couple reasons, but the key reason he talks about in this book is the failure of traditional churches to realize that Christianity is yet to be discovered. And he says that Christianity, the true Christianity, is what we keep saying, the divinity of man, the divinity of humankind, and the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's what Jesus taught. Unity's attempt or intent is to help people in and out of Christianity discover, or any spiritual movement, any spiritual walk. That's what we say. There's only one. There's one presence and one power. Unity's intent is to help people in and out of Christianity discover their own spirituality for themselves. Now, again, the book was written in 1965. That's even more. I can understand the emphasis of why he said that back then. But the creeds and doctrines of the Christian church, the traditional Christian church, turned into a machine, and the mechanizations of the Roman Empire were the de facto standard. So when we say orthodox, the orthodox Christianity doesn't mean it's, quote, right, just means it's the standard. Doesn't mean that it's the right, well, definitely not right for everybody. We probably still feel that today. Many fundamental evangelical Christians today are saying that the United States started as a Christian nation, and that's the intent, and that's what they want to do. And this history says it's not true. Jefferson, Franklin, Adams, and others all are on record as not creating a religion of the government, and this will continue to be a disagreement for a foreseeable future. So the key for unity and the key for churches like New Thought was and the reason for moving towards this was to have a first-hand and immediate experience of God. Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was, some says he was the father of transcendentalism and the New Thought, and he gave a speech at Harvard commencement in he was a noted minister in 1838 in his famous divinity speech, and after that everybody called him an atheist because he promoted oneness and acceptance and the first-hand experience of God, that we all can do that. There's nobody that can get in between, should be in between us and whatever you choose to call God, whatever that is for you. So unity emphasizes, in the book he talks about, it's not an offshoot of a Christian organization. Unity's teachings are directed toward a first-hand experience of God. That we are, Martin Luther tried to do that in the Protestant Reformation, got close, but didn't. I don't think that fully developed. The idea didn't. So under pressure in 1921, Charles Fillmore wrote a statement of faith, 32 statements of faith, and it created a serious crisis because it looked like a dogmas and creed, and because of that, it just died. I mean, it wasn't really. I didn't hear about it for a long time till I was in Unity. But he qualified himself. This is where he qualified himself. He wrote at the end of those 32 statements of faith, he wrote, he put a warning about it. He says, we shall not be bound by this tentative statement of what Unity believes. We may change our minds tomorrow on some points, and if we do, we shall be free to make a new statement. So he was saying right then that he Charles Fillmore, was not going to buy into this thing where we had to have a creed. He was under pressure to do that. At least that's what the authors writing about the time say. Excuse me. So that's 32 statements of faith, and there's again in this idea of what is unity, and maybe that's the original thing. They're going to bring those back. Somebody talked about bringing those 32 statements of faith. I don't think that'll happen because they're traditional Christianity based, because that's what was at the time. That's not going to come into play. So the other thing that he talks about, he gives a thesis in this book about practical Christianity. So why do we use the term practical Christianity? It is not intended to imply that unity is a religion that is essentially different than Orthodox Christianity. However, I think it is. So he calls unity is called practical Christianity simply because of the unity idea, the actual teachings and practicing of the teachings of Jesus on a 7-day-a-week basis. No ritual, dogmas, or creed is needed to experience God. So unity is not a new religion. Unity is purely and simply a technique for demonstrating and practicing Christian principles, is what he says, which is what Jesus taught. Love your neighbor as you love yourself and love God. So Jesus' teachings were love. So I've experienced this, and you probably have too. If somebody asked you if you're unity, you may even get, just like Emerson did, get branded an atheist or an agnostic, or a witch, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what you want, pagans. We had pagans here last night. So if that's your path, your spiritual path, that's okay too. But it's a misunderstanding. People just don't, again, this Orthodox teaching that is so pervasive and ubiquitous in our society has been handed down for 2,000 plus years. Well, that's the New Testament part, longer than that for the Old Testament. What Christianity needs to be is not an ancient teaching. It needs to be something for the current times, and they haven't caught up. So Butterworth in this book gives a brief history of unity movement. There's a whole lot better, quite honestly, better explanation, more thorough explanations. He's got just a couple paragraphs about this. I will tell you that he does mention the influence of Phineas Parker Quimby. He was a spiritual healer and had a significant influence on Mary Baker Eddy. So the reason that New Thought came into play is because one reason is medicine was a bunch of quack theory in the 20th, at the beginning of the end of the 19th century, at the end of the 19th century, going into the 20th century, it was just so crude, cupping and bleeding, and there was no really technology on medicine. So the healing teachings came into play through New Thought, and that's what Myrtle Fillmore heard. You've heard the name E.B. Weeks. He was a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins, a master teacher, taught all the New Thought leaders, Ernest Holmes and the Fillmores. So this was the seed. The healing ministry was the seed that started the New Thought movement. And then Unity's focus is different than the others because we focus on the teachings of Jesus, not about Jesus, but teachings of Jesus, and affirmative prayer. Charles Fillmore wrote, Christ's truth, Christ's truth with capital T, and Christ is not Jesus' last name. Christ's truth, Charles Fillmore says, it seems to me, is of vastly greater importance than any amount of theorizing about the existence of heaven or hell, or life after death, or how we should be sprinkled or plunged in order to be saved. To one who gains even meager quickening of the Spirit, Christianity ceases to become a theory. It becomes a demonstrable science of the mind. Now see, he's using the term Christianity to come back in. That's what was being done at the time. So again, Butterworth is a master at explaining unity and New Thoughts in simple, concise, elegant ways. Discover the Power Within You is a great book. This is a good book, but you'll see Melissa and Bill. I thought, he gets down, he tells the truth very quickly. So, but the title of this is, what is the relentless stream of truth in your life? How does that apply to you? What is your stream of truth? So I don't know how many of you get the MailChimp or saw what I wrote this week in the MailChimp about my spirituality is like a fine stew. So I'll read a little bit of that to you to tell you what my spirituality is like. A Unity minister colleague recently told me about a congregant friend of his, wasn't his congregant, who shared with her minister after years in Unity, she realized Unity doesn't meet all her needs, all her spiritual needs. So her minister, acting somewhat surprised, the minister said, well, who told you Unity could supply all the answers or had all the answers? So he continued, our spirituality is like a fine stew. She looked puzzled. The minister explained, for me, the base of my stew is the metaphysical interpretations, the principles and teachings of Unity. And then this goes on for my experience with this, is I also like other ingredients in my stew, like onions and okra and tomatoes and all kinds of stuff. Reflecting on the comparison between my spirituality and my favorite stew, I realize Unity is the core of my spiritual understanding. Very deep, this is the basis. And if you have been even traumatized or abused, or I was raised in the Fundamentals Church, physical, spiritual abuse in a lot of ways. Unity may be all you need. It may answer the questions, and then as you grow, it may change. I think like the woman who started this. So what I said was, I still also include elements from mystic teachers like Father Richard Rohr or Thomas Merton or Master Eckhart. I include in my spiritual stew Buddhist philosophy and teachings, Thich Nhat Hanh, Pema Chodron, and Dalai Lama, and others. Hinduism, I include the teachings of Michael Singer's Living Untethered. And yes, even traditional Christianity. I love the harmonies of Southern gospel music. I love the harmonies, not necessarily the words or the message in the words. But I love the harmonies that's there. It touches my soul because it was in part of my DNA. That's in my stew. All these elements and more, how my spirituality is like a fine stew. Your stew may be similar, but it's very different, or at least different elements. It will not be the same. You can add, remove, and revise elements to make it what you need. And as you grow to experience your spirituality, you may want to modify or alter the elements. Change your recipe. It's your stew. It's your spiritual journey. And then when we share, the thinking of this, when we share our spirituality from a place of oneness and a place of love, like we would sit down and share a meal of our favorite stew, there's no judgment. No judgment. No dogmas or creeds. No worries. No righteous condemnation. Just deep love for sharing each other's stew and our deep love for ourselves and each other, and deep, deep, deep joy for sharing our spiritual journey. So now as I think about this, I need to add a little Tabasco sauce to mine. So what's in your stew? Namaste.